A Chicago public school is taken to court over a controversial sex education program. The parent who brought the lawsuit tells her story next on Significant Insights. Hello and welcome to the program. Good to have you with us today. In April of this year, Whitney Young Magnet School, one of the finest middle schools and high schools in Chicago, scheduled a special sex education workshop that deviated from the Illinois School Code and Chicago public school policy. Parents were not given proper notice of the presentation, and the school also denied a request for educational materials of the presentation, which was requested so that parents could determine for themselves if the content would be appropriate for their children. And contrary to the Illinois School Code, which says that abstinence is to be emphasized and promoted, the website of the presenter indicated that, well, she had a very different perspective on sexuality. One column she wrote was titled, "Playing It Safe, Why Hooking Up Safely with Others is Normal." Sally Wagenmaker is a parent of two Whitney Young graduates. At the time of the sex education workshop, her daughter was still in her senior year. Sally is also a Chicago attorney and president-elect of the Christian Legal Society. What happened in the spring of 2018 that has caused so much concern? Because now we're talking about a specific action that you have taken on behalf, really, of not just your children, but the other children. What happened?
Right. Well, it was a week like any week. Sunday night rolls around, you're getting ready for school. Every week, Whitney Young publishes notes, basically one email with several announcements. Report card pickup, special bell schedule, an award, things like that. And so I scrolled through Sunday night, and there was an announcement. They have a Q&A from the principal, Dr. Joyce Kenner, and it was Q&A, is there any sex education offered other than in the 9th grade health class? It's a little bit of a manufactured question probably, but the answer was, oh, glad you asked. They're actually, on Tuesday morning, Dr. Nicolette Pulowski will be teaching the 7th and 8th graders in special workshop.
With no details about what it was about.
Right, there was a title, and they said the 11th and 12th graders will be a week later, the following Tuesday, and don't you worry, the 10th graders will have a sex ed class workshop before the end of the year. Nothing about the workshop speaker, nothing about any kind of detailed information, and as I came to find out later, that was quite inadequate and actually illegal.
How did you find out the details and who it was?
Sure. So I didn't think a whole lot about it other than this is just very odd. There had been an incident a couple years before involving bullying and some LGBT type things, and I actually had emailed. I'd gotten some very positive response, very attentive response, I would say, and my daughter had the chance to opt out of that. And I did think, a couple years before with that, I thought, if this ever comes up again, I need to do something, because when it came up before, the administrator said, no one's ever complained about this. And this is actually an approved CPS
So they
speaker.
had done this before?
No, they had done something different. There was another organization that was speaking on LGBT tolerance. So I raised some questions because I wanted to know more, and I was told this was an approved speaker and no one's complained. So I thought, that's interesting. So my daughter and I dialogued, and here we are 2-3 years later. So that's April 8th, Sunday night. April 9th in the morning, a friend of mine and I went to the local workout place, as we usually do, around 5:30 in the morning. She has Whitney Young children as well. She's a parent. She's actually a medical provider, so she was concerned from the standpoint of medical risk type things. But she said initially, I don't know what's going on either, and this is somebody that I Googled her, and I couldn't find a thing. I thought, that's odd.
So how did you find out?
So I went on the internet. And I just Googled her name, her full name. So I found out that she's a salsa dancer, and she has a website where she has some articles listed, which are pretty crude. One is getting a handle on sex, which I think is a reference to masturbation. Other things like that, not very detailed. She had her academic credentials. looked a little bit deeper, found that she had written a column, which again is fairly crude, called Hump Day, and it looks like when she was in college, probably about 8 years or so ago at the University of Wisconsin, and she wrote a regular column. All those, not all of them necessarily, several of the articles are online as far as I can tell, including articles advocating pornography, advocating casual sex. One of her titles was Pornography Good Enough for an 11-year-old and a Republican. Another article was about, I'm sorry, again, it's very crude, but if you are going to have sex while you're drunk, make sure you know how to take care of your birth control. So those are the kinds of things that were absolutely shocking.
And so this was the woman that was going to conduct the workshop or the seminar for junior high students. So obviously you're concerned.
Right.
And I assume then that you approached the school?
Right. So I emailed Dr. Kenner, who is the principal. I emailed 3 other administrators, including Lynn Zalen, and I'm not sure if I emailed her because she was on the notice or because she was an assistant principal, frankly, but out of the 4, 2 emailed back and said, I don't have anything to do with this. Ms. Zalen and Dr. Kenner both emailed back fairly quickly, and I will say Dr. Kenner, she will email at midnight, she will email at 5 a.m. She is ardent and zealous for the school, and there is no question about that. She loves the school.
And what does she do?
Dr. Kenner is the principal, and she's been there for several years.
Whitney Young.
So both of them emailed back. Dr. Kenner, her initial email was probably within a couple hours. I think I emailed at 6:50 in the morning or something, and she emailed me back by noon, and it was a 1-line response, and the first sentence was, "Wow!" exclamation point. Wow, I will check on this further. I'm sure it's okay. And then the other email from Ms. Zalen was, everything's fine. This presenter, Dr. Pulowski, she is an alum of the Academic Center of the Junior High program, and we think it'll be fine, it'll be great. So there were some more exchanges. Dr. Kenner later told me that the 7th and 8th grade program went for it. At this point, I didn't know about the law, I didn't know about CPS policy. I am an attorney, and I practice in the areas of nonprofits. I represent schools. I do a lot of work in the areas that might touch on this, but I didn't know what the rules were at that point.
Sally was about to learn what the rules were and that Whitney Young was not following them. More about that right after the break.
The Illinois law says we emphasize abstinence. And from a public health risk, for where I live in Lawndale, it's a very high-risk population, very low income. From what I understand from medical providers, that STDs, teen pregnancies, these are all the kinds of things that really set people up for failure in a socioeconomic way.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about parents' rights when it comes to what's being taught to their children in the public schools. As a parent of a student at Whitney Young Magnet School, the alma mater of Michelle Obama, and by the way, one of Chicago's finest public schools, last spring Sally Wagenmaker was surprised to get a vague email about a sex education workshop that her daughter would be attending. After researching the presenter, Dr. Nicolette Pulowski, online, Sally was gravely concerned that her attitudes about sex were simply not appropriate for students. However, her pleas to cancel the program were rejected. Sally is a Chicago attorney serving as a special counsel with the Thomas More Society. Her first step was to approach the problem as a parent. When that didn't work, step 2 was to approach the problem as a lawyer.
Anybody can go on the internet and Google this woman and find out all sorts of crazy things about the way that she approaches sexuality. The law, as I came to find out, is supposed to emphasize abstinence and healthy sexual behaviors away from STDs.
But there was nothing about her background or her website that suggested that that's where she was coming from.
And that's what it would suggest. And so that's really, from a process standpoint, I'm not saying that that's what she would advocate today, although I have my suspicions. I'm saying that based on my research as one parent, based on a half an hour of work, she seems very questionable. The school pushed back and said, it'll be fine. Dr. Kenner said she went to the 7th and 8th grade the workshops. She said everything was age appropriate. And that may be true in the sense of if you're talking about some things that are kind of pre-sexual activity, but I don't know. I have no idea what actually happened, other than Dr. Kenner said everything will be fine and that the programs will go forward for my daughter and for all the other juniors and seniors. She also said, I've looked at this information. This is all for an adult audience. And I thought that doesn't, all the things that Dr. Plowski has been advocating sexual, casual sex, advocating hookup sex, advocating make sure you lose your virginity because you would want to test drive a car before you buy it. Wouldn't you want to go out and test drive? You're really missing out on life unless you're sexually active and in a very promiscuous way. So
it's the absolute opposite extreme from abstinence.
Absolutely correct.
So what happened then, Sally? Were there other parents that had raised concerns, or
yes? Well,
was there a lot of the parents who said, "Hey, no big deal"? But
it's interesting.
So you
right.
there were other parents who were
Right.
sharing your concern.
My husband and I were both very concerned, and we emailed about 155 parents from one of my daughter's participation activity lists. And out of that, I would say a dozen, maybe a little more, responded. And then there were another half a dozen or so of friends who I know who through other circles I've known since the kids started school there. So there was definitely concern. There was one parent who responded and said, I can see your point, but I trust the administration. I'm sure it will be fine. Other parents, one fellow spoke up and said, I'm a single dad and I have 2 daughters there, and I want to talk to my children about sexuality. Another person wrote back and said, I have one child there, and I want to get the other child in, so please don't use my name. I cannot speak up on this matter because I don't want any political fallout. I don't want to hurt my children. So there were definitely people very concerned, definitely people supporting us.
Who just didn't want to make waves.
Absolutely.
So what happens at this point? Was there options given for your daughter? Or?
Right. So we got to a point Friday at the end of that week where I asked Dr. Kenner for a meeting. I begged her to cancel the workshops, and she wrote back and said no. There was an opt-out, but we asked for the educational materials. We didn't get them. They told us we could opt out, and they said no meeting, this will go forward. So at that point, as an attorney, it seemed unmistakable that I needed to file TRO, an emergency injunction motion, temporary restraining order. So basically to go to court and to say that since the principal will not do what she's supposed to do, we're going to ask for relief. And particularly Friday during the day, I was at a loss. I couldn't believe this was happening. Friday night, a parent emailed me and said, did you check the law? Did you check CPS policy? And so I looked up the law, and actually the law is very good. It says that
the law being Chicago Public School.
The Illinois School Code says that they're supposed to.
The Illinois School Code.
Illinois School
Chicago
Code
Public
says
School.
abstinence is supposed to be emphasized. Abstinence is supposed to be promoted, and that there will be policy in accordance with that. So then I found the CPS policy. CPS policy says you give 3 notices of any sexual ed workshop, and the most recent notice has to be at least 2 weeks before the actual presentation. There needs to be a meaningful opportunity to opt out, which means that you get the materials. You can ask for the materials, which we never got, and that the speaker must be, the workshop presenter must be credentialed, must be approved by CPS. And that's what happened a couple years ago. That administrator said, this is an approved speaker. I asked for all of that. It was never provided.
None of that had happened.
To this day, I don't think she's credentialed, and I haven't seen any educational materials.
Has anybody explained why?
No.
Why that happened?
No, what happened was...
Why that they were violating school policy, Illinois education policy?
They circled the wagons. No. So I went to court, filed the court papers, served the emergency motion on the principal and the school administration. They canceled.
It appears to me that there's going to have to be more parents like you who are not only concerned, but you're informed, and that you force the schools, the districts, into accountability.
Absolutely.
Because it's easy for the parents to kind of let the schools handle it and back off and not do anything about it. And obviously another solution.
Right.
Take your kids out of the public school.
One
but then
solution,
we're surrendering when we do that.
Right. Yeah, well, we've thought a lot about that in the last couple of weeks. I think that when the schools know that they're going to be held accountable, hopefully that will help them to behave. When there's such a lack of respect that you send something out less than 48 hours notice and you don't do a thing until you get a lawsuit. Lawsuit's the last thing that I would have ever wanted to do. It would have been nice if somebody had said, thank you. Thank you. This is a person we would never want to have. If nothing else, just there's too many questions, or thank you, now we'll go check on her. But there wasn't anything, there wasn't that dialogue, there wasn't that involvement that you would expect and would like to have. So I don't want to draw swords. I hope that other people across the country will not have to draw swords. I do hope that people will pay attention, will show up, will be involved, and will help each school district across the country to know that we care. We are maybe the silent or not so silent majority, or whatever faction or group we are. We care so much that we deserve the respect of being heard and being listened to, and then having our children at least to have that sensitivity of, there's two different ways to look at this, or even in the Illinois law. I mean, the Illinois law says we emphasize abstinence. And from a public health risk, for where I live in Lawndale, there's a very high-risk population, very low income. From what I understand from medical providers, that STDs, teen pregnancies, these are all the kinds of things that really set people up for failure in a socioeconomic way.
And if there's any place that abstinence should be talked about, it's in those neighborhoods.
Right. You can talk about it morally, you can talk about it quite factually, because quite statistically, the more that you delay, the greater your chances are of achieving and doing well in life.
What do you want parents to know who are watching this program? What kind of advice could you give them?
Pay attention and to talk to your school administrators, to understand that you have these rights to talk to your children, because the time your child is in high school, they listen to you less and less, but they are paying attention. And they do, I think, for me personally, and I think for some of the other parents, what I saw is that the kids appreciated knowing that their parents care that much. And for that father who said, oh, I need to be talking to my daughter about these things. We don't want to hide the truth. We don't want to hide sexual development and all that goes with it. We want to encourage our children to be very responsible with it. So I just, parenting doesn't stop, when your kids are 12 or 20 or probably even later than that.
We contacted Dr. Joyce Kenner, the principal of Whitney Young, for her comment on the sex education workshop discussed today. She said that the speaker was a former outstanding Whitney Young student and that she, Dr. Kenner, would never advocate for any speaker who did not present age-appropriate material. She also stated that she is committed to providing sex education information that's been requested by students. Of course, as we discussed, the speaker was not approved or vetted by Chicago Public Schools, and the parents were not given the appropriate amount of warning about the workshop, nor were they given the course materials for review. Sally Wagenmaker has dismissed her lawsuit against the school because they canceled the controversial workshops and because CPS officials agreed to follow up with all principals on appropriate sex education according to Illinois requirements. Illinois school code says that abstinence is to be promoted and emphasized. We encourage all parents to learn about the law as it pertains to their children's schools. Sally is concerned that school administrators seem to be bent on promoting early sexualization of school children. Evidence of that and what's happening nationwide when it comes to sex education after the break.
My understanding is in New York, there's pornography being taught in the public school sexual education. In San Diego, there was just something in the news about something very similar to Virginia, where the parents are coming forward and saying this is too much, too soon. And that's really that area. Again, the Illinois law does emphasize, it recognizes that parents are the ones who really have the say.
Sally Wagenmaker was successful at getting one particularly concerning sex education program at Whitney Young High School canceled. However, the administrators refused to admit they did anything wrong. Whitney Young is not the only school promoting controversial sex education programs, and that's what Sally and I talk about in today's Final Thoughts.
It's my understanding as I've come to learn more and more about this, that this is really going on all across the country.
Well, I was given something that today, a school in Virginia, a school district in Virginia, is being warned by a team of lawyers that the presentation of explicit sex videos to classes of 14-year-old girls likely were a felony, violations of state and federal law. Sex videos that are being shown, and as I read further in this, it seems even in some of these that they were advertisements for sexual toys and things of that sort. And they are, they're taking them to court. And we hear reports of this happening, this type of thing happening
Coast
all
to
over the
coast.
country.
My understanding is in New York, there's pornography being taught in the public school sexual education. In San Diego, there was just something in the news about something very similar to Virginia, where the parents are coming forward and saying this is too much, too soon. And that's really that area. Again, the Illinois law does emphasize, it recognizes that parents are the ones who really have the say. The parents have a constitutional right to be involved with their children's sex education.
Do you think the educational system believes that?
I think there's a difference. I think, more broadly speaking, there's so many issues involving ideology and the medical world, medical profession. So my understanding, as I have learned, is that there's something called comprehensive sexuality education. And comprehensive is kind of a code word for let's acknowledge that kids are going to be sexually active. So let's teach them how to put on condoms. Let's talk about how they can have a great sex life as a high schooler.
How do you feel about that as a parent?
I think it's horrible, but I think before that, I think that it's most important that we are in the trenches with our children and that the schools are respectful of that role and that they give us opportunities to opt out. I don't want to have that kind of education in my child's school. Yeah. I don't think it's appropriate for anybody, but I recognize in fact that there's that diversity. And so I think that Whitney Young's culture is tremendously respectful. They respect people of all different faiths, from all different backgrounds, of all different, and they have a program for learning disabled kids. You respect all the kids who are there and part of that program. So I would think the same respect should be accorded for how people address this incredibly sensitive area. And I think maybe just the final point with that is that I don't know that we are sensitized now to how critical this is. I think we see things just go by and it's kind of in the noise. Parents send their kids off to school. They don't expect this kind of rhetoric or ideology to be pushed on their children, and the administrators just kind of go forward and don't expect the parents to be that interested.
I really appreciated the time with Sally, and by her own admission, the last thing in the world that Sally wanted to do was to take legal action against the school at which her children were participants. But it came to the point to where it became necessary. Part of the question is, so what would happen if she hadn't been an attorney? She was still a concerned parent. And there are a lot of parents across the country that are facing these same kinds of issues because, as Sally said, there is pressure today for sexualization of our children. And every parent, we're at a point to where every parent has to be concerned. Regardless of who you are, regardless of the school that they're in, I don't care if it's a public school, a Christian school, private school, you need to be aware of what's being taught, and you need to participate in the life of that school as long as your children are part of it. And when you reach a point like Sally, and you're not an attorney, but you know that something needs to be done and the school is not responding positively, in fact, in many cases very negatively to what you're saying, there is action that can be taken, and there's some wonderful agencies, legal agencies that can help you. One, of course, is the Thomas More Society, of which Sally is part of, but also Mock and Baker right here in the Chicago area that is there to help in these areas. Alliance Defending Freedom has taken a number of cases and won a number of cases. So there are ways to do it and places to go. Keep that in mind. Thanks for joining us. God bless.